Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Week 15 edition of the Football Diehards DFS show. We're here with you, as always, on the weekend, just catching up on everything that's going on with the football. We've had 2 games go today. One's going on right now. The injuries continue to be a bloodbath, Eric, and we're hoping that we can get through the Week 15 DFS slate unscathed. I mean, for those of us and those of you guys that are in the playoffs right now, it's brutal with the injuries that are going on right now. It's all key players going down. So we'll recap a bit of it today before we get into the magic of the main slate tomorrow. But first of all, how was your week? How you doing? How was your week in week 14? And anything that's going on with the games today?
Week 14 was plus EV. Had a nice 2.5x week, so didn't put all the right pieces together, but had the right guys in the player pool, right? So far so good. For the Saturday slate, I'm gonna have a nice little Broncos overload sweat live here on the air. And then over in the college basketball streets, I just binked a nice 20x in the large field tournament today. So
very nice.
Been a nice upswing just in time to put all of that money into everyone's stockings and presents under the trees.
Oh yeah, this is the time of year to win for sure. I got crushed on NBA yesterday. I don't know what happened. I was very confident in it, but none of it worked out. Saturday, I had played just cash pretty much for the most today. Light cash. It looks like it should be okay as long as the Broncos don't completely crap the bed here. I just need kind of a a floor game from Russell Wilson and Javonte Williams, and I'll be okay. Despite the injuries to both Michael Pittman and Zach Moss in this game. So, recapping a little before we get into it. So we saw Michael Pittman get knocked out with a brutal hit from Damonte Kazee. Zach Moss was hurt as well. We've got Jamar Chase with a shoulder injury going on right now, and that's not even talking about stuff we've got going on tomorrow. We'll get into all that as we go, but some of the things we're looking at tomorrow, the Texans are destroyed by injuries, as you well know. Your hometown team there. Tyreek Hill is probably the biggest news we're looking at today as far as the fantasy landscape goes before tomorrow, because he hasn't practiced all week with an ankle injury. So that'll be an important one to follow. But we'll get into all of it in the DFS slate, and we'll see, we'll try and help you build the best cash lineups, the best GPP lineups, the best stacks to win. We both had a good week in week 14, so we'll keep it going with you, and we'll be here a couple more weeks, all the way to the end of the regular season to help you with your DFS teams. I am on Twitter at JAC3600. Eric is at Fantasy Nav. You can follow us there, and we will be talking football. We're always on Twitter talking football, answering questions, just kind of chopping it up with the rest of the community. So, after this, if you got more questions, just join us on there. Throw those questions in the chat. Season long, I know this is playoff time for some of you. Season long DFS, anything you want, and we will get to it. But are you ready to get down to brass tacks and start going through the positions for the main slate?
Yeah, let's dive in.
I organically used brass tacks there. So the quarterback position, again, we have 10 games. A lot of the main guys that we look at are on this main slate. So we'll start right there at the high end, 7,000 and up. Right now, it looks as though of these guys in that upper tier, that upper tier price range, Josh Allen really seems to be the only one showing any kind of ownership projections. The rest of them are, single digits. So I'll kind of let you wade through which ones of those you like best. For me, I think Josh Allen is fine for a cash quarterback. You're certainly not going wrong with him. It's the highest total game of the week at 50.5 last I saw. The way Dallas's offense has been going, it probably stands to reason that Buffalo is going to have to throw a lot. Josh Allen, despite any despite any questions about the Buffalo offense and criticisms about how they're, fighting for a playoff spot here, has not been on Josh Allen. He's still fantasy's QB1 overall, both in total points and in points per game. His supporting cast is as healthy as it's been all year. Over the last 2 games, he's run the ball 19 times. So I think if you're spending up for quarterback in cash, he's definitely the guy I would look for. I'm probably going cheaper as of right now, in that sense, which we'll get to, but he's pretty much the one I'm looking at for cash. Where are you on Josh Allen, and who else in this upper range are you looking at?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird spot with regard to the top tier options. Josh Allen, like you mentioned, is the QB1 on the season. Right there next to him is arguably the hottest quarterback over the last 4 or 5 weeks, Dak Prescott. And neither of these guys are really drawing a ton of projected ownership, right? Like they're both kind of low to mid single digits respectively, despite being in arguably the most desirable game environment on the slate, right? So for me, it's really going to boil down to if these projections hold upon refresh tomorrow. If they do, I'm probably going to have way more than either of them I would have anticipated. 8K for both of them is more than I typically like to pay. But if we're talking about the either of these guys at 3 to 6%, I mean I'll go up there. There's enough value on the slate to kind of do whatever you want. So that kind of underscores the conversation for today, right? You can really get to anybody at that you see fit. So Josh Allen, Dak Prescott are both guys that I will happily roster at their projected ownership. Apart from that, really the only other name of note is Justin Fields at 7K flat. He's in a real tough spot against Cleveland, but we've seen him absolutely explode as a ball carrier since returning from this injury. That's obviously led to some pretty lofty fantasy numbers as well. So he'll probably come in around like 1 or 2%. A guy that's as athletic as he is, in a spot where he's going to be seeing a ton of pressure, it can probably sidestep or roll away from that and do a lot with his legs. I don't mind it, but I don't find myself with a ton of interest in Fields stacks. So he'll be lower down the priority list for me for that reason.
Yeah, that's often the problem I have with him. I always like him as a cash quarterback at cost, but he's not that double stack DJ Moore whole commit thing. It's just never an exciting one with a ceiling.
I mean, Moore has been electric with him since he returned, right? I think he's averaging over 100 yards and a touchdown per game since he's returned. But banking on that happening again against this nasty Cleveland defense is probably a losing proposition this week. Right? So they've been playing great. It's a tough spot,
And the field often will recognize single stacks. It's getting those double stacks right that really get you leverage over the field, because you're not, something is off there when you're doing that, and it's playing them together when you can leverage yourself off chalky players. By the way, we're joined by Bob Harris in the chat. Hello, Bob. Thanks for joining us. Bob and Mike, Football Diehards, are going live in 15 minutes from 9 to midnight on SiriusXM Fantasy only tonight, not SiriusXM NFL, because the games are on there.
Big mistake, big programming mistake, not bumping the NFL game for Bob and Mike.
What are they thinking? Yeah. They got to get their priorities in order.
I'm going to write a strongly worded letter.
But yeah, they have some. They have 3 hours tonight on SiriusXM Fantasy Channel 87 from 9 to midnight, taking you through the fantasy playoffs. Dave Kluge and Marcus G are guests on there tonight, and I will be on at 11:20 Eastern tonight, talking a little bit more DFS with the guys. So so if you're with us and you're with them, you're getting some fantasy football stuff here right now. So stick with us, stick with the Football Diehards. Thanks, Bob. All right, so moving into this mid tier. So I'll start here again. This is a fun one for cash. I'm almost certainly going to be playing Matthew Stafford as my cash quarterback this week. He is facing off against the Commanders, which is we've seen now as the nut spot for passing games. The Rams, who are not that exciting of an offense this season overall, have a team total of 29. They are also as healthy as they've ever been, minus perhaps Tutu Atwell, who is dealing with the concussion protocol. But even if he's out, that really doesn't matter for this. Stafford has been hot over the past 3 games against some tough defenses. Just to put into perspective, over the past 4 games, Washington has given up 150 points. So, you know, you got to load up on Rams in this one. I think you can play any combination of them. Stafford is only 6,000. He's arguably far too cheap for this matchup. They've given up the most yards and the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, the second most points per game to fantasy quarterbacks. So I don't, barring an injury, which God hope I don't jinx us here with the injuries that are going on here, I really don't see a path to downside for Stafford, and there's a ceiling. So, I'll mention a couple of other players that I think are also good cash plays. I think Purdy is fine against Arizona. There's really nothing you can go wrong with him. He's still not at 7,000. Jordan Love in a much better matchup against Tampa Bay is also fine here. But, given the fact that they're both more expensive than Stafford, I think that's reason to save the money there for cash and use that money elsewhere for some high-end skill positions. What say you about this mid-tier here?
This mid-tier is delicious.
It's
there are
loaded.
So many great plays in here. There was a point where I was thinking about just highlighting the entire mid-tier on our show because they all have defendable arguments behind them. Stafford is easily the most desirable on merit. He has no business being 6K. He's really showing shades of the Super Bowl champion version of himself this year, and he's got one of his best stable of weapons in recent memory. So absolutely love it. Right now, he's projected to be the most popular quarterback on the board, but it's nothing too crazy. I see him around 15%, which is a lot for a quarterback, but nothing that's going to cripple you. And there's a lot of ways that you can work around that. So I will have a ton of Matthew Stafford. He is also in a very high-scoring game environment. It seems like this game and the Buffalo game are just kind of teetering back and forth in terms of line movement for which one will settle in with the highest total on the week. So I'll have a lot of Matthew Stafford. Brock Purdy has essentially been the cheat code in GPPs these last 3 weeks. Just double or even triple stack Brock Purdy, and you're probably finishing inside the top 25 or so of most of your tournaments. So like that you're getting a little bit of a rostership discount on him. He's closer to 10%. But I mean, everyone else, like the other sides of all these games that we're talking up are super interesting, right? Like Kyler Murray's probably going to have to throw a lot in a game where they're projected to be behind by a ton. San Francisco has a 30-point team total in this game, and Arizona has 17.5. I mean, like they're going to be so far behind so quickly that obviously Kyler Murray is going to have to do a lot and can chip in with his legs. Sam Howell on the other side of the Rams game, we all know that he is captain volume. I expect that to continue in this game. That should shoot out. The only thing that I would be concerned with for Jordan Love, he's in a great spot, right? Basically, everybody not named Desmond Ridder has had a season high type of game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Mm-hmm.
I would watch the Aaron Jones news here a bit. If Aaron Jones is in, I think they might roll out a bit more of a balanced attack, and that would all but strike Jordan Love from the player pool for me. But if not, he should still be throwing a ton. This offense likes to score through the air. This young stable of wide receivers that Aaron Rodgers would have dreamed about is playing very well this year. So putting the irony aside, it's definitely a good spot for Love as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point on Aaron Jones as well. And the last I saw, I think they're tentatively expecting him to go. He's been horrible to trust all year. I mean, it's pretty much been a lost season for him this year with his injuries. So we'll see. But I think that's a really good point as well. And to your point, you said about the Buffalo Dallas game and the Rams Washington game kind of jockeying back and forth. I think when all is said and done, the Rams Commanders game is going to wind up being the highest scoring one, because Buffalo has weather in the forecast, wind and rain. So we'll have to see if that stabilizes too. I don't think it should move you off of it for fantasy purposes, but I do think it might give you the edge to that Rams Commanders game when roster ships are kind of showing similar stuff. Into the lower tier here, the one I'm not really looking at anybody in this path myself. I know you have one guy that you want to talk about here, but I will mention Case Keenum is starting for Houston and is the minimum 4,000. I think anytime there's a $4,000 quarterback that's in play, you have to give him a look at least if the matchup is good enough, which in this case I think it is. Tennessee is a pass funnel defense. The biggest knock here is that Tank Dell and Nico Collins are both out, so we really don't know what kind of efficiency this passing attack will have. But I think it's a fun way to get some leverage in a large field GPP, to have that cheap quarterback, maybe stack him with Dalton Schultz, who is playing this week, and with Noah Brown, who I guess is the de facto wide receiver 1 for that team this week. That costs you no money, and you can throw in some high-end players to complement them. And if this game does somehow happen to shoot out a little bit, I think you can get some ceilings out of those guys. So I like that in the multi-entry. What about you in this lower tier?
Yeah, I specifically highlighted Will Levis's name because of the announcement that Case Keenum will be in there, right? Like I think he can actually keep this one a little bit more competitive than Davis Mills might. The issue is just the lack of weapons all around on the Houston offensive side, but that is further expounded by the lack of weapons on the defensive side. Will Anderson looks to be very questionable, if not ruled out already. Tevier Thomas as well. So there should be little pressure in Will Levis's face. There should be limited resistance, or at least matchups that you can exploit in the secondary. We all saw what Will Levis can do with 3.5 minutes and a very motivated DeAndre Hopkins, where Narrative Street, he might be motivated against the Texans this week. So it's much more of a dart throw, right? Like, I'm getting to enough Noah Brown to where you could kind of skinny stack this one with Hopkins and Levis, but if nothing else, is more of a flag that if you need to go down for some salary relief, Will Levis is one way to do it. And I like your point on Keenum, right? Like, there's plenty of value on this slate, but there's also a ton of really expensive guys that are in amazing spots. So the idea of getting essentially a free square in Case Keenum and being able to do literally whatever you want with the rest of your build, I mean, it has some appeal to it for sure.
Yeah, and while you were saying that, I was just checking the injury report. So you're right. Not only are Thomas and Will Anderson out, Blake Cashman is as well, who is the leading tackler for Houston. Oh my God, what is Derrick Henry going to do with that? But yeah, I think that's. I like the Levis play, and especially that
this all too well, right? You know why the Texans are so injured this week, no?
That it's like, oh no, my leg, I can't face Derrick Henry this week. Oh, too bad.
No, it's a far more practical point that hits home. It's that lovely turf at MetLife Stadium just dropping people left and right.
Oh my God,
played there last week, and the whole team came out on the injury report.
Yep. Yeah, no, fair point. I forgot they took on them this week. Oh my God.
How does the NFL allow that to happen?
I don't know.
This is something that's been going on for years. It's like a known quantity, and they're like, yeah, whatever. We'll just let our stars continue to get hurt.
It's a tangible trend there. It really is. The players know it too. Yeah, no, I guess you're right there too. All right, so that's the quarterback position. We're going to move right into running backs, but if you're listening to us now and you've joined us, throw those questions in the chat. We'll get to them for sure. We love helping people win. So the running back position, I'm going to highlight a couple of guys here first, because this is a week that I like in cash. a week that I can spend at running back and feel good about it is the week that I really tend to gravitate towards in cash. And there's a couple of guys that I am not leaving my cash lineups without. One is, once again, Christian McCaffrey, who is, absolutely unstoppable and unmatchup proof. Given, beyond that fact, he's facing the Cardinals team. The last time he faced this Cardinals team, he put up 51.7 DraftKings points. That was in week 4. You mentioned already the 49ers team total of 30. McCaffrey is going to be heavily involved in that. For some reason, he continues to not move with price tags. The guy should be over 10,000 and he's 9,300. He was 9,200 last week. You got to lock him into cash. It's I'm curious of your thoughts in GPP for sure. But Kyron Williams is the other one here. This is, we mentioned the Rams offense as well. This is an incredible spot for him too. The Commanders have given up the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. The last 4 games, he has 94 touches, and the last 2 games, he's averaged a 92% snap share. There is no running back in the league, Christian McCaffrey included, that has that type of bell cow role, and he's only 7,500. He should be upwards of the top tier guys with what he's done and who he's facing this week. So he's another cash lock for me. I have no problem with those two being my, big spends. I'll deal with the rest of it as it comes, but those two are in your cash. Their rostership is reflecting that. So I'm curious as to where you stand on that. As far as, how would you come with the field in GPP?
Yeah, I'm curious to see what you've got on your side. I've got Kyron as the most popular player at 35%, which is just wild. I thought a lot of that was going to go to Christian McCaffrey's direction, which, to be fair, he's still quite popular, almost 20%.
Yep, they're top 2
a lot of this
right now, I think.
A lot of this has to do with a player who, at least judging on a 1-week sample size, actually is the only player with a larger opportunity share than Kyron Williams, Ezekiel Elliott basically being free. So that's really the play here, right? Like, everyone's playing Zeke, and then they're playing one of, if not both, Kyron and CMC, and that's why the rostership is as high as it is.
Right.
For me, I love both of them, right? You make solid arguments, and I'm not going to belabor those points. For me, where I have Kyron is probably going to be in my Stafford builds, because pairing those two up is probably the least exposure, or least popular combination of those two that you can have in the game, but it'll still happen plenty. CMC, I mean, if he's going to be half as popular as Kyron Williams, I don't mind flipping those roster ships on their head. I mean, this has been the absolute golden goose of the matchup for running backs this year. That huge point total that you mentioned for San Francisco, CMC should be contributing to a lot of it. So both these guys are great plays. They'll both be in the pool. For me, it's really just going to be about, how you pair them up in order to, not eat so much chalk. But that's not to say the rest of the high tier isn't without its own appeal as well. Alvin Kamara is in a fantastic spot against your fighting New York Giants. They are a little bit of a plus matchup overall. They do give up a fair amount of yards per reception to running backs out of the backfield, something that Alvin Kamara can do fairly well. And Kamara is sitting down in like the mid single digits in terms of rostership. So he might be an interesting way to pay up and get a little bit different. Maybe, pairing him with a Kyron or a CMC instead of putting those two together. And then right at the cutoff of the high tier here, our cover boy, one of my favorite plays in the week, Rachaad White, 7K flat. Green Bay is a phenomenal matchup to opposing running backs on the season. I didn't mention it when we were talking about Jordan Love, but this is a game that I also think could score up fairly well. It's not carrying the highest total on the board, but one that I think can get into the mid 40s or maybe push for 50. And Rachaad White has, again, an elite opportunity and has been red hot down the stretch run, right? This is a guy that's putting up 15 or more points. I think in 7 of his last 8. It's RB4 on the season. Just, the role that he has in this offense, he's always on the field. He's catching balls out of the backfield. Baker likes to check down.
Mm-hmm.
And I see him at about 3%, which is just a thing of beauty. Like to be all the way down like that for a guy that, has top 3, top 5 running back upside and has been reaching it pretty consistently down the stretch run. Like I'm going to have so much Rachaad White on this slate.
Yeah. And I lucked out a little with him. I wasn't super high on him coming into the season, but he always seemed to fall to me in drafts right at the end of, it was like I was with other people who felt just the same as I did about him.
Yeah.
And he fell always far enough that I was comfortable taking him. And he wound up being one of my most rostered players. And that has really paid off.
It has.
He was one
I
of the
found
most
myself making a ton of decisions between him and Dameon Pierce. And I wish I could say I took more Rachaad White than I did. Still have some for sure, but yeah, maybe the homerism shown through.
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking back. I was actually kind of the same with those. So
Yeah.
I remember them both being in the same spot, and I liked Pierce less coming into this year. So it wound up being leaning towards White, which was lucky. I'm in an industry guillotine league that Paul Charchian set up, and I'm actually in the final 4 right now. And
Yes,
White has been instrumental to that because Trevor Lawrence has been my quarterback all year, and he's been a roller coaster for the most part. I got Fields now, with all the stuff, but we're pulling. We got off to a good start this week with Devontae Adams on Thursday, and I had nobody really today. So we're pulling. We're looking to make the final 3 next week.
Let's
but looking into this mid-tier running backs, why don't you kick us off with this thing? You mentioned Ezekiel Elliott already, and well, I'll let you start off this time. What are you looking at in this kind of 5,500 to 6,900 range?
Yeah. I'll save Ezekiel Elliott for you because he's really a cash game consideration. It feels gross to rely on that repeating. If it does and it bounces me out of a tournament, I understand, right? But I'll be well underway to the field. Derrick Henry right at the very top of this mid tier. I think earlier today, Bob Harris said that he has an ownership stake in the Houston Texans based on how well he's played against them in the past. And we've already rattled off the litany of injuries on the defensive side. The thing that's interesting with Henry is I don't know if many people are going to go there, right? There was a time not that long ago where Henry against the Texans would see his highest rostership of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Now I see him around like 6%. Some of that has to do with Spears taking a little bit more work, especially on that Monday night game where the whole nation saw them make that tremendous comeback. But in this kind of game environment, I mean, Henry should be able to really feast on a very banged up Texans defensive front. So like him at 6.9K, Breece Hall at 6.4K. Every single time you think that you've made a mistake by rostering a member of the hapless Jets and Breece Hall, he does something phenomenal with the ball in his hands. We have seen Dalvin Cook get a little bit more work of late, but not so much to where I think you should necessarily be concerned. Miami gives up a fair amount of receiving yards to running backs because they are oftentimes playing with a lead, as they are, at least for now, projected to this week. Breece Hall being the player pool. James Cook is an interesting way to get into that hammer game, the big total between Dallas and Buffalo, where he sits right now, sub 5%. He's also been coming on of late, right? He's been doing his best Rachaad White impression, another player that was drafted kind of around that same range.
Yeah.
Definitely a guy that I'll have some exposure to. If there is weather, that is all the more cause for the Bills to lean on the ground game. And lastly, Chuba Hubbard, 5.6K. This matchup on its face against Atlanta, isn't the best in the world, but I mean, they've really been leaning on Hubbard over these last few weeks. He catches balls for them out of the backfield. That's something that could very much so come into play here. That's kind of the counterpunch to this stout Atlanta Falcon defensive front, as I choke on my tongue. So, a guy that is relatively inexpensive. He's a direct pivot off of Ezekiel Elliott. Saves you a little bit more money, gets you a little more flexibility. I'll sprinkle him in wherever I'm pivoting off of Zeke.
I like it. And I think pivoting off of Zeke in this range is potentially a key to the GPP here, showing what rostership we have on Zeke. So I will, build off that and segue right into, he is another one that's going to be really tough to fade in cash right now. The first game without Ramondre Stevenson, he had a 91.2% snap share and 29 touches, which included 7 receptions. The matchup isn't great against Kansas City, which is why I think your point against a direct pivot off him is a valuable one to have in your back pocket. But I don't think you need to overthink that in cash. He's not priced at all for the workload that he got last week, and is expected to get again this week. So I think at 5,800, you absolutely play him in cash. Before we go to the wide receiver, or actually the lower tier, the running backs, we have some interesting breaking news coming down.
I just saw that exact same alert.
Adam Schefter is reporting that, this is not tomorrow, bear in mind, that after being recently cleared to practice, New York Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers is likely to be medically cleared to play this week upcoming, league sources tell ESPN. That is wild. I mean, is he really going to play? 2 tears in a year. How is he back on the field? I mean, I don't know what to make of this thing at all.
This absolutely boggles the mind, right? I mean, in moments like this, I'm going to be racing after the show to seek out the content and thoughts of Stefania Bell, Edwin Porras, the fantasy PT, right? Like this defies medical capability up until this point, right? So, like, say whatever you will about Aaron Rodgers, love him or hate him, say whatever you will about the Jets, like this is a tremendous moment in terms of sports medicine. So I'm super intrigued to see how it plays out. If I want to put my cynics hat on, I think he's been kind of pushing for this late season return under the pretense of them being still in the playoff hunt, because he knows that they're not actually going to be there and he won't actually have to take the field. But nonetheless, like, these are legitimately, like, licensed medical professionals that are willing to stake their claim and reputation that he is medically able to play. So even if he just gets through that hurdle, it is a unprecedented moment in sports medicine.
It's unbelievable. I would love to hear. I'm sure Bob and Mike are talking about this right now on Sirius XM Fantasy.
Let's patch him in live.
I know.
Hold my phone up to the
let
speaker.
him take over here. I would love to hear what's being talked about like this. But so I'm like you. I'm gonna douse myself in this stuff as soon as we're done here, because this is fascinating. Yeah. But he's not playing this week, and we are dealing with this week. So we move on. He's not right. So we move on to the lower tier here. As the week went on, we had some other news. I was kind of, all week pretty much bent on McCaffrey, Kyron Williams, Ezekiel Elliott as my 3 cash running backs. Easy. I probably will still go that way depending on what we see. But I should mention that Antonio Gibson in this tier is perfectly fine to play in your cash as a pivot off of Zeke. I don't know that I'd recommend fading one of those top 2 guys. It just does not seem like a good cash move to do. But if you want to save the $600 off of Zeke for Gibson, I don't think that's a terrible idea. Brian Robinson has been ruled out for this one. We've already mentioned that this projects to be one of, if not the best fantasy environments for the weekend. I expect Gibson will not only be the lead back, but also handle the passing game work. So he's too cheap to totally ignore here. So I think he's in play for cash for sure. And I'm interested to see as we kind of go, through the night and into tomorrow, what his rostership will settle at, or if people are just going to, bank on what we saw from Zeke last week at $600 more. What's your take on Gibson and anyone else in the low tier here?
Yeah, Gibson is a favorite pivot off of Zeke for me. I would love to see a world where he not only maintains his passing down work, but also takes a majority of the lead down touches. I mean, even if he doesn't, right? Let's say he's splitting that early down work down the middle, and then he gets the third down work. 5.2K is too low for him. It's kind of a neutral matchup against the Rams, right? You love the high total, but in terms of their performance against opposing running backs this season, they settle in the mid-teens in terms of fantasy points allowed, right? So, he can do a little bit there. If we're buying the game script where Washington is behind, you love him as a receiver out of that backfield, right? Looking through the rest of the low tier here, not a ton to get excited about. I guess to that same effect, if you want to play the what could go wrong lineup for pivoting to Antonio Gibson, you could also roster some Chris Rodriguez, right?
Yeah.
4.5K. He could very much so make that roster go wrong. But beyond that, Devin Singletary at 5.4K, it's not the best matchup by any means, right? The Titans are fairly stout against the run. I haven't seen any news on Justin Simmons. If he's out, all the better for Devin Singletary. But Singletary sort of regained the lead back role there in Houston, and one that I think Case Keenum will lean on heavily this week. So don't mind him, 5.4K. The probably one of the biggest decisions after you've decided to pivot off of Ezekiel Elliott is which of the Chiefs running backs do you play? Where we sit right now, it looks like the market has spoken and they're going to CEH. I see him pushing nearly 20% rostership with Jerick McKinnon down sub 3%. I don't know if you're seeing something similar, Jamie, but
Yeah.
that was kind of surprising to me. I thought people would be inclined to chase the touchdown production, as DFS players are often want to do. But if nothing else, a situation to monitor, right? They're both basically 5K and 5.1K. They both should still see a decent amount of opportunity in a game script where Kansas City should be leading. So another way to get some salary relief, or alternatively as pivots off of Ezekiel Elliott with those Chiefs backs.
Right. And Singletary, excuse me, Simmons, by the way, is out.
Okay.
So
all the better.
Yes, to your point there, that definitely reigns in as news we should be following as well. All right. Moving on to the wide receiver position. The top end. I mean, there's a ton to like here, right? Too. I mean,
Everybody.
this is another one that you can
Pay
just
up.
you can just highlight every player on this thing. So we'll start. We'll start with the obvious here. So let's talk Tyreek Hill before we get into any of the rest of the stuff that we'll look at with these high end wide receivers here. So Tyreek Hill hasn't practiced yet this week. He's questionable. Another thing that I saw kind of get tweeted out as our show was going on that I'm going to look down. I'm going to scroll down here for the exact wording here. According to Adam Schefter, the Dolphins plan to allow wide receiver Tyreek Hill to determine whether he can play with his ankle injury Sunday against the New York Jets. I hate that. I've said that before. I wish the coaching staff would just make a decision on that.
It's
I don't know
why they're there. Like,
yeah,
I don't get it either.
yeah. I mean, I know there are some players like, Jamar Chase, I know has a tendency to play it safe if he's given the choice here too. Like he's known for that, but I don't know. The player is going to play here, I would think, if he's given the option. He wants to be out there. I don't think Hill's a gamer. I don't think he's any different. I think if they put it in his hands, he's going to be out. He's going to be playing. But I mean, he's a true 50-50 right now. The thing to really wonder is if he plays, are you playing him? I mean, if he's not at 100%, plus it's against the Jets, who are as strong a secondary as there is in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't find myself going there a ton, right? Most people aren't either. I don't know if you're seeing anything to the contrary, but he's not drawing a ton of rostership by my measure. So I mean, look, he's clearly the type of player that can lead the position in scoring any given week. I think he's done it 3 times this year, and he's got like 6 or 7 top 5s, right? So like it's hard to leave that on the bench. One of those number 1 overall finishes of the position was week 12 against these New York Jets. So maybe as we're talking through it now, sprinkling him in here or there is fine. He's not a priority by any means. Watching Hard Knocks, apparently he was in quite a great deal of pain, and it was actually his wife that was on him to get back in there. So, I mean, the reporting around this is bizarre too, right? Like they clarified with that report earlier today, but like 2 days ago, Mike McDaniel said Tyreek Hill's availability will come down to a pregame conversation where he would need to express confidence in being himself on the bad ankle. So, like, he's acknowledging that he has a bad ankle and it's probably going to inhibit him. But as long as he tells the coach that he's good enough to be his usual self, he'll be out there. Like, I mean, look, it's a very high risk play, but in that risk, like there's certainly some legitimate potential for reward. So mix him in the pool, but I'm not going out of my way to roster him.
Yes, and you are correct, by the way. I just looking at his projected rostership, and it's sitting at sub 2% right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Tyreek Hill, follow the news, take that for what it is.
Am I talking myself into playing Tyreek Hill here? I didn't want to, but
you might be talking both of us into playing Tyreek Hill here.
2%.
Tinkering right now while we're talking. So, yes. By the way, just an update here. We probably should have been doing this the whole time, but we're midway through the second quarter. The Lions lead the Broncos 14-0. Jared Goff is not screwing around right now. He's 15 of 20 for 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. They're barely running the ball at all. It's all an air attack by Goff. Gibbs has 3 carries for 30 yards. Montgomery 4 for 15. Gibbs has scored a touchdown through the air. Sam Laporta has the other one. The Broncos have basically nothing right now as far as offense. Jerry Jeudy has 1 40-yard catch. The rest of them are colossal duds right now. So that's not
haul that one in.
Yep.
That touchdown last week, or that should be touchdown, was just mind-boggling. From Jerry Jeudy.
Oh my God, I know that was. I've still seen highlight reels or low light reels, I guess you'd call them on that one. Yeah. Even 6 days later. So I might be a little bit poorer going in if the Broncos can't mount some sort of comeback into tomorrow, but we'll see. All right. We just got some more news coming on. DJ Moore is expected to play. I know he was battling an ankle injury. I don't think that was ever in question, but it's officially official that he should play. So that's good for any of the Fields Moore stacks we talked about. But all right, let's talk about the rest of this top tier as far as wide receivers go. So I'll wade through this a little bit in cash because I have trouble with this tier in cash because I am committing to running back in the cash context. So which leaves little money to throw around in the cash aspect here. I have gone on record to say that with Tyreek Hill banged up and CeeDee Lamb potentially in a weather game, I do have Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver 1 overall this week. Translate that into the DFS world, I think he's a steal at 7,800 in this, for this Rams offense. Puka Nacua is 7,300. I think he's absolutely fine to play in the cash context as well, even though he's not showing quite as much rostership as Kupp is. But, this is against the Commanders defense that's given up by far the most yards to wide receivers. He is torturing other rookie receivers as far as, receiving yards. He's almost lapping the field as far as that goes. So, I mean, in stacks, what do you think? I mean, well, I'll get to that. I'm curious if your thoughts, if kind of just going Stafford, Kupp, Puka is a good GPP move, or if you think that's going to be too popular among people, because it's very doable. at their price tags and with other values around the slate. But I think both Rams wide receivers are good in cash. And then Lamb is obviously amazing if you can afford him at 9,200, but I personally can't, and probably won't be going there in cash. But if you prefer him to one of those high-end running backs that I spoke of, I don't argue Lamb being in your cash either. What do you think about that Rams stack, first of all, before you talk us through some other plays here?
So I love that Ram stack. I'm curious to see what you've got on your end. I've got Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua both at like 15%, right?
No.
So that kind of surprised me. I figured most people would see Cooper Kupp below 8K, below 9K for that matter, and just jump with joy and immediately click the button, right? 7.8K is a joke of a price tag for Cooper Kupp. But to see him and Nacua both carry, a pretty fair amount of rostership and essentially be neck and neck was kind of surprising for me. My initial plan heading into the slate was everyone's going to pay up at running back because there's so much value on the board, and the top tier running backs are in such amazing spots. And the idea of double stacking Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua was going to be my ace in the hole, right? Like, one of them was going to be rostered pretty much in every Matt Stafford stack. Both of them together, less likely. Even more less likely would be to triple stack this with Kyron Williams. Just literally push all your chips to the middle of the pot, saying this is the game to be overexposed to. I think that kind of combination is going to be one that is fairly underrepresented. But even not going to that extreme, I love the idea of pairing up Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua in your Matt Stafford builds. I don't think they're going to settle in with this much rostership when it's all said and done, though. So something to watch.
Yeah, and you're right. I was wrong. I thought I was kind of 2 days ago, Cup was a little bit ahead of him, but I mean, as far as it's settled now, you said about 15%. I'm looking right now, just get kind of some composite ownerships, just averaging, some of the sites together, ours included. It looks like Puka Nacua, you're right, is about 15%, and I'm seeing Cup at around 11 or 12.
Oh, interesting.
Which is interesting, to see if that'll hold throughout the course of the
Yeah.
day. But yeah, I think I'm with you that, and I like the idea of a triple stack too. I think that leverages any of these double stacks for sure. And against this team that's given up so many points the last 4 games, there's really no
Unreal.
reason why all can't hit in this one. But we move on into this mid tier. 5,600 to 6,900. There's a couple that I'm kind of liking as far as this goes. The only one that really stands out for me in cash is Rashee Rice, who finally, we saw such an insane target per route run for him as the season was in the beginning stages, but it was frustrating because he always was like 4th or 5th in snap share of the receiving core, but he's finally become the wide receiver one. Believe it or not, last week he only played 3 less snaps than Travis Kelce, and he has. I just lost my page, but I think it's 21 targets over the last, or 28 targets over the last 3 weeks, something along those lines.
That's right.
But Rice is still arguably too cheap at 6,100 for a lead role with Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. So I do like him in cash. What do you think of Rice and the rest of this mid tier?
Yeah, Rice is a nice cash piece overall. Last week was really that kind of tipping point where it seemed like the Chiefs kind of took the training wheels off for him. So he was on the field a ton. I also think like they after a pretty upsetting loss, as evidenced by their behavior following the game. I think that they're going to be looking to kind of go back to this very consolidated type of offense that they trotted out there when they were at their best. I'm not saying Rashee Rice is Tyreek Hill by any means, but an offense where it's really the the Travis Kelce and one wide receiver show, that wide receiver being Rashee Rice. And this week against the New England Patriots secondary, it is a pretty juicy matchup, right? He'll see the most of Miles Bryant, who's allowing an 82% catch rate and, well into the high teens of yards per reception. So, I guess the concern from a tournament perspective with Rice is just how much passing the Chiefs will have to do in this game, which kind of, limits his upside a tick. But if nothing else, like I think he's the type of player that can, he can pay off 6.1K in, 2 or 3 quarters worth of productivity. So like Rice in the mid tier, DeAndre Hopkins, I talked about earlier, narrative street, call it what you will, but setting that aside, it's still a beautiful matchup on paper against bang Texans secondary. Beyond that, I mean, there's not a ton that I like here. DJ Moore again has been exploding lately, but it's a tough spot. Garrett Wilson, I mean, you're really rolling the dice with, depending on Zach Wilson to repeat his performance from last week, but I mean, Jalen Ramsey's been playing his side mostly, so he can get into the better matchup. He's okay at 5.8K. Terry McLaurin at 5.6K. He is a key run back in these Rams overload stacks. Another player that literally just keeps trucking along and just blowing the pants off of his price tag every single week. Yet he still settles in like the mid 5Ks every single week. His matchup against Kendrick, at least primarily Darian Kendrick, is going to be one that is to his advantage as well. So don't mind him, either in a vacuum or certainly as a run back option in Ram stacks.
Yeah, I'm into that too. And the one that I built actually did have him. I'm hoping that he's not too overlooked. I don't think he will be. I mean, he put up a 0 last week and he only had 3 targets, but he was motoring along with 8, 9, 10, 11 targets every week before that. So 5,600, like you say, he just does not seem to move on DraftKings. By the way, we're joined by Albert Mariquin, one of our favorites.
Albert,
thank you for joining us. Albert, if you have any questions and anyone else listening, throw them right in that chat. We're about to wrap up the wide receivers here with the lower tier, and we'll get into the tight ends. So get your questions in while you can. So the lower tier, 5,500 in wide receivers, this is a place where if you're kind of on the same path of building as I am in cash with, high tier running backs, and which looks like the way the field is going to go right now as well, you've got to find some plays down here. So before we get into that, Eric, why don't you look and see where you stand? What are some players that you're looking at from a GPP perspective or a cash perspective on 5,500 or lower here?
Yeah, so there's a lot of guys in here that are in the player pool by proxy of the game environment that they're in, right? Usually not going out of my way to roster Gabe Davis, but going to be all over that Buffalo game. He kind of feels like he's sort of the key to Josh Allen reaching his ceiling too, right? When Gabe Davis is having a good game, Josh Allen is has a very good shot of being the number 1 scoring quarterback on the week. So something to consider. Largely overlooked because it's always a roller coaster ride with him. Same can be said for Brandon Cooks, right? I think there was reporting earlier today that he's expected to play. So as long as he's out there, he'll be quiet for 3/4 of the game, and then all of a sudden they'll trot out the Brandon Cooks package where he's getting 3 targets on the next 5 passing plays.
Right.
So this game should score up, and he should have a role to play therein. Curtis Samuel, same argument as Terry McLaurin, but $1,000 less expensive. And then from there, like you really get into the salary savers, right? Before that, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, perfectly fine options, right? Christian Watson has been ruled out, but after that point, Dontavian Wicks is 4K flat. Pop Douglas is less than 4K, 3.9K. Your guy Wan'Dale Robinson getting into a rhythm with old Tommy Colcuts there at 3.7K. He's going to be super popular. Honestly, I mentioned Pop Douglas, but I think all of the New England guys are going to be pretty popular. They're all sub 4K. They don't really have a whole lot of bodies there. So their passing game is kind of consolidated a bit. So these might be some fairly popular salary relief options in a game script where they should be trailing. Who didn't I touch on here? Tutu Atwell, questionable, but if he plays, he's a really interesting. I mean, he's arguably the best way to get ultra unique in this Rams game, right? When he's out there, he's running a ton of routes. He's got a good connection with Matt Stafford. It's late game, so be ready to swap if he gets ruled out. Fortunately, the best games of the slate are all in the late window, so you should have options. But something to consider there. Khalil Shakir. We'll talk about this a little bit when we get into the tight ends. Dalton Kincaid looks very questionable, and Khalil Shakir's mid-season renaissance was when Dawson Knox was off the field, and they ran a ton more 11 personnel. If Kincaid is ruled out, I'm assuming the Buffalo Bills go back to 11 personnel, and Khalil Shakir slots right back into that mid-season form, or at least mid-season role that led to that mid-season form at 3.8K. So not without its risks, right? Really anyone not named Stephon Diggs in Buffalo is going to carry a bit of downside with them.
Right.
But look, dissecting these last two games is really going to be the key to the slate. So there's going to be some times where you have to hold your nose and play some dicey guys.
Yeah. And I like a lot of those low calls there. Shakir is very interesting to me because I was just looking around his range in some of the lineups too. And I think, if people are off him, that's a really fun one. If people are on Pop Douglas and Wan'Dale Robinson, which right now it seems they are.
Looks to be the case,
so I'm going to build off your Tutu Atwell take here too, because I wrote up this guy earlier in the week. Because like you say, this is one to watch for. I had assumed early in the week when I wrote the pieces that Tutu Atwell was not going to play in this one. Right now, it looks like he's tentatively expected to clear protocol. So we'll see on that too. But if he doesn't, Demarcus Robinson is $100 more. And he had 10 targets last week as well, when Tutu Atwell was ruled out. So I think if we get some kind of news on that, we're going to see him be popular. A $3,600 wide receiver for the Rams in this game is going to be something that people are going to be all over. As of right now, it looks like it's dropping as Atwell's clarity, is kind of muddies a little bit more. But I think watch out for that. It would be, I don't know, I guess from a cash perspective, it would be kind of nice to get that news early. From a GPP perspective, you like the uncertainty, and then pivot later on. So it's interesting how things build out that way. But I definitely like Robinson in cash. If Atwell is ruled out, if he's in, that becomes a lot more dicey as far as a floor goes for cash. Jaden Reed is currently the most popular from what I'm seeing, wide receiver at 4,900. It's pretty easy to see why, just for his current role. I mean, he not only had 10 targets last week, but rushed for 38 yards on 4 carries and scored a touchdown. This is the second rushing touchdown he's had. Christian Watson is out still, and Tampa Bay is such a pass funnel defense here. So,
crumbled.
Yeah. I think what you said earlier holds merit, that Aaron Jones's potential return definitely can cap a bit of the ceiling, or even a lot of the ceiling on these Green Bay wide receivers. But in cash, I don't think you worry about that at 4,900, because Reed really should not be that cheap. And I think you just kind of take that gift of a price tag and, the target floor that it comes with there. And that's kind of it for me in this range. Douglas, the aforementioned Douglas, like you said, Wan'Dale Robinson is pretty popular. I think both of those guys are absolutely fine for cash, just for their, PPR floor on DraftKings. And that's kind of where we're looking at here. I love the Wicks call in GPP at 4K, especially with a much more popular Reed. I think we got a nice little player pool going on in this lower register here.
It's wild how much value there is on this slate. Like you can literally get to anyone anywhere you want. Like I might just for giggles build a Case Keenum lineup and just stuff in 3 of the top 5 players at every position everywhere else, because
Oh,
I mean
I've done it already. It's fun.
you can do whatever you want. This is going to be a fun one.
Yep, you run it back with Henry or Hopkins, and then do whatever you want. As far as I've already done it, it's a good time. All right, so moving on to our final section of the evening, we'll take about 5 minutes here to run through the tight end positions, and then we'll wrap it up. So let's start with the obvious here. Travis Kelce. Kelce is Kelce. Just even people are calling it down games. They're still as good as any tight end is going to be in the league. He has a bad matchup on paper. New England has given up the second fewest points per game, the third fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends. There's no path for me to use him in cash. So why don't you take the Kelce lead here?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of like Christian McCaffrey, where he's just always going to be in the player pool, right? In a tournament, the guy who's got the highest percentage chance of leading his position at scoring needs to be in your player pool. This isn't a great spot overall, right? Kind of like I talked about with Rashee Rice. This is a game that I think Kansas City should be able to win pretty handedly. So you're banking on a tight end paying off, $7.5K in 2 or 3 quarters of production. It's definitely a lopsided proposition, but one that Travis Kelce, certainly has the potential to pay off, right?
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, I don't really think you're ever going to have a slate where you say he's a fade. It's just not as much of a priority. So the one I'm really interested to know your take on, and spoiler alert, if they ask about him, I'm going to go on record on Sirius XM Fantasy tonight, and I'm going to call Trey McBride a fade this week for DFS. Right now, for me, he is looking at... Nope, he's not the highest roster tight end anymore. It looks like Mr. Chig Okonkwo has passed him as of right now, but he is a close second from what I'm looking at right now. He's 5,200. He's finally priced up where he should be. Certainly cannot argue the volume. And I will say that this fade is more of a GPP take for me than cash. I'm not using him in cash, but with his volume and his rostership, I cannot in good conscience say you shouldn't play him in cash just because he's shaping up to be a cash play. But San Francisco is death to tight ends, and they have been all year, and they have been all last year, and they have been but the year before that, since they've had this coaching staff and since they've had these linebackers and safeties that they still have. Tight ends can't do anything to them. They could shut him down. And I think a good GPP path for me is fading him. What's your thought on that?
I think that's really the move here, right? As recently as a month ago, I probably would have made an argument to the effect of, well, I'm gonna have some San Francisco overload stacks, and Trey McBride is probably the most viable run back option, which is still a true statement, right? But looking back over these last 3 weeks, you haven't really needed to run back your San Francisco overloads to take down a large field tournament, right? So, if you don't have to do it, I don't want to play a tight end facing what has statistically been one of the most difficult matchups against the position this year. I think they've actually gotten even more stingy over the last 6 weeks. So they're allowing 9 points per game on the season to opposing tight ends. That was 30th on the year. They're down to 8.1 when you narrow that down post trade deadline, right? So, this San Francisco defense is an absolute juggernaut. So no need to go there, as evidenced by the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're seeing it that way too, because it's a tough one to pull, because it's a tough one to fade when someone is that popular and their production states they should be that popular. It's a tough trigger to pull, but that's kind of where I am as well. What are some other tight ends in his range that you're looking at?
Yeah, the mid tier's kind of tricky. Surprisingly enough, right there with San Francisco in terms of their prowess at slowing down tight ends are the Arizona Cardinals. So that player pool for San Francisco gets a little bit more narrow. Not looking for much George Kittle exposure. I will never play Taysom Hill. I don't care if he's gotten hot or he's sustained for a period of time. I can't bring myself to do it. Beyond that, you mentioned Dalton Schultz earlier. A bit more of a floor play than a ceiling play for me. I think the Texans are going to have a hard time, but he should be able to get to value if nothing else. David Njoku has been a revelation this year. He's flashed some upside with Joe Flacco. The Bears defense is very much so improved, but they're a little bit softer against the pass and specifically over the middle. So, Njoku can do some stuff at 4.7K. Probably my favorite player, and it's caveated once again, Dalton Kincaid. I mentioned that he's looking very questionable. He's in that late slate of games. If he's in fact ruled in, he's probably going to be like a 1 or 2% guy at 5.3K. That is, the second pass catching option in this offense. Right there neck and neck with James Cook for sure. So if he ends up playing, I mean, he's going to be a guy that'll probably be 5 or 6x the field to pretty easily.
Yeah, I'm into that for sure. Even with Knox returning, he still had 8 targets last week, and then, like you say, that game is one you want to get into. All right, so real quick, the lower tier before we wrap it up here. I mentioned Chigakonkwo is now the highest rostered tight end on this slate. I think that's okay to do. Houston has given up some big games to tight ends. Over the last 3 weeks, he does have 17 targets and 12 catches. So I think he's fine. I mean, at 2,900, if that's the kind of passing role he has, I think he's perfectly fine to do. I like Tucker Kraft a lot too for $100 more. He's an every down tight end for them. He's 10 targets over the last 2 weeks. He's played 96.7% of the snaps over the last 3 games. And, it's the Bucs. The Bucs have been a pass funnel defense, not just to wide receivers, but to tight ends also. So my cash tight end is likely going to be one of those 2 guys. What about you in this low tier?
Yeah, I was going to say the refresh for me actually bumped Tucker Kraft up to the most popular player on projection right now.
Too.
Kind of like a cluster of those 3: Kraft, Okonkwo, and McBride right up top. Kraft's in a fine spot. I kind of think that the perimeter defense is where Jordan Love is going to look to attack, but Kraft doesn't have to do much to pay off 3K. So certainly a fine option. Dawson Knox is probably going to soak up a ton of rostership if we get news on Dalton Kincaid being rolled out. So 2.7K, another way to get into that priority game. Besides that, I mean, Kyle Pitts at 4K. I feel like we've been singing this song all season long, right? If he's going to be around 4K, he's going to be in the player pool. Jonnu Smith doesn't really look to be a thing as much as he was earlier in the season, at least. Not the best matchup against Carolina. Carolina's stats against the passing game in general, they appear to be fairly strong, but in reality, it's more of a volume thing. Just teams aren't needing to throw against them all that often. But surprisingly enough, this is actually slated to be a bit of a closer game. So maybe we see Kyle Pitts come off of a spike week last week against Tampa Bay and make it 2 in a row against Carolina this week. So don't mind him at 4K either.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to play him too.
He's always in the mix. It's so annoying.
Some form. Yep. All right. Yeah. All right. So that is the tight ends. That is going to do it for us. So we want to thank everyone who joined us. I saw our listeners spike to a little while, even though we didn't get any questions in the chat. We saw our listeners spike for a little while in the thing there. So we know you were with us, and we know you were hopefully taking notes because we threw a lot of information out there. Again, this will be up on Football Diehards shortly after the broadcast, so feel free to go back and listen and pause and just kind of take our stuff for what it is. Go right over to SiriusXM Fantasy channel 87 right now and listen to Bob and Mike. They're there helping with season-long stuff. I will be on to talk more DFS at 11:20 Eastern tonight. Hour later because the football game is on. So Football Diehards were pushed back a little bit, but Eric, what can we see from you for the time being?
Yeah. If anyone wants to see the words that I write or my random musings on Twitter, you can find those at Fantasy Nav on Twitter or X, depending on your fancy. Like Jamie said, definitely let us know if you have any questions in the comments. We're actually checking this as we get closer to lock. So if those questions pop up, we're more than happy to answer those after the stream. And yeah, head over to Sirius XM 87 only tonight. 888-963-2682. Call in and tell Mike and Bob that you want to hear more of Jamie Calandro than just his DFS spot.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. You had that number. Yeah, that number was right on tap for you there too. And I'll look forward, speaking of that, we always wind up on the same one doing those Monday night mock drafts together, Eric, with the two of them, which is
they're
big
just around
fun.
The corner.
Yeah, so I mean they'll start those things up as soon as the season ends. So we'll look forward to seeing you on there too. All right, that's going to do it for us. We will see you back here for week 16 next weekend. We'll tweet it out long in advance so you know when to join us on here. And for Eric, I'm Jamie. We'll see you next week. Good luck on your lineups this week.